I've decided I want to tweak the Skeeter Load for my 44 Snubby. I've made reference in several past videos to the Skeeter Load. What is that, you may ask? In short, it's a 44 special with a 240 to 250 grain cast bullet loaded with 7.5 grains of unique, and it shoots at around 950 feet per second. This bullet at that velocity has the ability to do about 99% of the things we'd ever want to do with a 6-gun. And the reason it's called the Skeeter Load is it's named for a man that was referred to as Skeeter Skelton. Who is Skeeter, you may ask? Well, his full name was Charles Allen Skelton, and he was born in Hereford, Texas in 1928. He got the nickname Skeeter from his high school football coach, and it stuck. After high school, he was just barely old enough to join the Marines towards the end of World War II, and he was a decorated lawman. In 1949, he joined the Amarillo Police Department and then received an assignment to the U.S. Border Patrol in 1950. This was one of the last horseback stations, and when it closed in 1954, Skeeter left the Border Patrol and he went back to Deaf Smith County, Texas as a deputy sheriff. Skeeter served one term as sheriff, spent a short time running a feedlot, and then in 1963 went back to law enforcement as a customs inspector. He then transferred to the DEA until he retired in 1974. In his later years, he served as the handgun editor for the Shooting Times. He died in 1988 after spending a great deal of time in the hospital in Houston. Now, Skeeter wrote in the March '75 issue of Shooting Times, let me quote a little bit of this. With full loads, the muzzle blast and recoil of the 4-inch Model 29, while not as fierce as sometimes described, brought me to the conclusion that the .44 Magnum was not the optimum choice as a law enforcement gun. While it is certainly true that one well-placed shot from it will anchor any man, there are other considerations. For law enforcement use, I returned a favored 1950 Target 44 Special with 4-inch barrel to my holster. After reflecting on my experiences with the .44 Magnum, I even loaded the 44 Special down to a manageable 250 grain, 900 feet per second rate that gave me good double action control and retained more than adequate stopping power. If you're thinking that I quit the Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum, you're wrong. It simply switched roles in my cast of handgun characters. The Model 29, in my mind, became an outdoorsman's gun, perhaps the finest ever made for the handgun hunter. I soon learned that the 6.5-inch and 8 3/4-inch models perform better than the 4-inch gun. Skeeter's load, which consisted of the Keith bullet, which is this bullet here, the Lyman 429-421. That's a 250 grain bullet. Over 7.5 grains of unique is much more pleasant to shoot than the 1200 feet per second or higher loadings, and at 900 to 950 feet per second, depending on barrel length, it will adequately handle most of the tasks and chores we expect from a big bore 6-gun. Skeeter's load was not original to him. It was actually given to him by Elmer Keith. I was recently reading Elmer's 6-Guns, which he wrote in the mid-50s, and I found this quote in that book. He says, "A charge of 7.5 grains of unique with any of the 3 Keith bullets is also a very nice load in the .44 Special, giving around 900 feet. This may sound a bit weak for a bullet shot from a .44 Magnum, but let's do a quick comparison. Bullet weight, velocity, and muzzle energy aren't everything, but they do give us a fair idea of how bullets will perform. I've listed some generic loads and velocities for several common handgun rounds, and then sorted by muzzle energy. As you can see, the Skeeter Load is very comparable to a .45 Auto Plus P, and the Skeeter Load uses a semi-wad cutter with a big flat me-plat, or the big flat nose in the front, not a round nose bullet. .45 Auto Plus P is certainly no slouch. And here's that same table shown as a chart arranged by muzzle energy. Again, the Skeeter Load with 500 foot-pounds of muzzle energy is a very capable offering. This is a load I've used quite a bit ever since I acquired my 6.5-inch Model 29. This has been an outstanding revolver for me, and that's one of my favorite loads to shoot in this gun. So this bullet, loaded in a .44 Special case, will shoot in this gun at a little over 900 feet per second when loaded with 6 grains of Alliant E3, and at about 950 feet per second, or a hair higher when loaded with 7.5 grains of unique. But I picked up this 629 with a 3-inch barrel a few months ago, and that shorter barrel means lower velocity with the same load. How much lower? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And then I want to figure out a load that gets me back up to about that 950 feet per second from the shorter barrel. The 7.5 grains of unique is above the 6.9 grains of unique that reloading manual shows a max for 44 special, but almost any modern gun can handle that 7.5 grains. I'm going to load my Skeeter Load for Snubby round in a Magnum case though, because the pressure will be even higher than the 7.5 grains, and I have a Charter Arms Bulldog, which is chambered in 44 special. I've shot the standard Skeeter Load in the Bulldog before with confidence, but I don't want to have a round with even greater power and pressure to be able to fit in the Bulldog chamber, just as a matter of good practice and safety. Since the Magnum case has more case capacity, which means lower pressure with the same amount of powder, I think I'll start my testing at 8 grains of unique, and I'll ladder test it all the way up to 10 grains. I'm certain 10 grains will give me more than 950 feet per second, but it's well under the max for 44 Magnum, and it's a nice round number, so why not? For this initial test, I'll jump in 0.4 grain increments and shoot 6 shots of each load. I'll show you a few of the shots at the range, and then we'll come back and discuss the results. I started with some standard Skeeter loads in the 6.5 inch Model 29, just to get a baseline, and they gave me an average today of 985 feet per second. That was a hair higher than expected, but that's okay. I then shot the same loads in the Model 629, and they averaged 905 feet per second, so the shorter barrel cost me 80 feet per second on average. After these two shots, I also figured out that I needed to adjust my camera. No, this is not what I'm start. 951. 942. 942. 948. 988. 992. 988. 1028. 1021. 1013. 1015. So here's what I got from my 3-inch Model 629. The standard Skeeter Load with the 7.5 grains of unique gave me an average of 905 feet per second. The 8 grains to 10 grains in the Magnum cases range from 887 to 1035 feet per second. All of the loads were pretty consistent. The extreme spreads, which is the orange line, range between 7 and 23, and the standard deviation, which is the gray line, range from 2 to 9. Again, the target I'm looking for is about 950 feet per second, so I'm kind of looking at velocities in the highlighted area. And I was in that window with my 8.8 and 9.2 grain loads. I think I'll go back and do a bit further testing now with these loads between 8.5 and 9.2 grains. The load that really shined today was the 8.8 grains. It gave me an average of 947 feet per second with an extreme spread of 7 and a standard deviation of 2. Now you may be asking, why go through all this to find a load that shoots 50 feet per second faster than what you already have and to add 50 foot-pounds of muzzle energy? As a bullet caster and hand loader, I'm not left at the mercy of what just can be obtained over the counter, so I have the freedom to develop just about whatever load I want. And every shot fired in testing these loads are still shots fired, which means more time on target, more time in the range, more trigger time. So, why go through all this? Because I can, and because it's fun. So now I have a pretty good idea of how to duplicate the longer barreled version of the Skeeter Load performance in my 44 Snubby, and I'll go to the range soon to fine tune it a little bit further. What about you? Do you have a pet load you've spent time working toward, or do you have one in mind that you want to develop? Do any of you have experience with the Skeeter Load? That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching, and God bless.